Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what might just be the greatest, most high-stakes political thriller in human history. We're talking about the incredibly messy 95-year reign of Rome's very first imperial family, the Julio-Claudians. You know, when you really break down the timeline of these 5 emperors, you quickly realize that it's actually less about grand political theory and much, much more about a desperate family business that's just trying to survive itself.
So, think about this for a second. What actually happens when the most powerful family in the world just keeps running out of heirs? The Julio-Claudians literally had it all. They had absolute power, unimaginable wealth, and dominion over the known world. But they had one glaring, fatal flaw that drove the entire narrative of their dynasty. They simply could not produce biological heirs. And this single driving conflict led to a desperate, bloody struggle for succession that ended up defining an entire century of Roman history.
Let's start with Section 1, the First Imperial Family.
Now, the term Julio-Claudian is really just a historiographical label. It comes from the merging of 2 immensely prominent Roman aristocratic families, the Julius Caesars and the Claudian Nerones. Julius and Claudius were deeply, deeply established Roman family names. But here is the absolutely crucial piece of context you need for everything that follows. Roman aristocrats were legally allowed to adopt an heir if they lacked a natural son, and that adopted son would then take on the new family name. And let me tell you, that one legal mechanism basically became the entire foundation of their imperial survival.
Honestly, you can forget everything you think you know about kings smoothly passing the crown down to their eldest sons. That myth of primogeniture, it was totally absent in this dynasty. In fact, Augustus, Caligula, and Nero completely failed to father legitimate biological sons who survived them. Even Tiberius's own son died before he did. Because of this massive biological roadblock, adoption became the ultimate, indispensable tool that these emperors used to basically force their chosen heirs right to the front of the line.
Which brings us to Section 2, Augustus and the Succession.
The founder of the empire himself, Augustus, frantically scrambled to manufacture a successor, but the guy faced just an unbelievable streak of bad luck. His nephew Marcellus, dead of suspected food poisoning in 23 BC. His fiercely loyal friend Agrippa, dead a decade later. So he even adopts his young grandsons Lucius and Gaius to solidify the line. But tragedy strikes yet again. Lucius dies in AD 2 and Gaius dies in AD 4. It's just a rapid-fire string of absolute disasters that completely decimates Augustus's carefully laid plans.
The sheer heartbreak of this is captured perfectly in the testament of Augustus. He wrote, "Since cruel fate has snatched from me my sons, be Tiberius Caesar my heir to 2/3. The tragic irony here is just palpable. The man who commanded the vast Roman Empire was completely powerless against fate. He was ultimately forced, highly reluctantly, to adopt his stepson Tiberius just to keep the family business alive."
To put all of this into perspective, we're looking at a 95-year span, from Augustus forming the empire in 27 BC, down through Tiberius taking over in AD 14, Caligula in AD 37, Claudius in 41, and finally Nero in 54, right before the whole thing crashes down in AD 68. Keep this timeline in the back of your mind as we go through these next rulers, because the desperate need for an heir is about to turn this dynasty incredibly dark.
Let's move into Section 3, Tiberius, Paranoia, and Purges.
Okay, this era honestly feels like a true crime thriller. The dominoes start falling when Tiberius's really popular adopted heir, Germanicus, dies highly suspiciously in Syria in AD 19. And on his deathbed, he actually alleges that he was murdered on Tiberius's orders. So severe paranoia sets in. Tiberius retreats and basically hands day-to-day power over to an administrator named Sejanus. Sejanus then creates this massive network of informers, which leads to widespread bloody treason trials where aristocratic property is just seized left and right. Absolutely no one in the family is safe. Eventually, Tiberius realizes Sejanus has grown way too ambitious, and in AD 31, completely out of nowhere, the emperor sends a letter to the Senate that results in the total purge and execution of Sejanus and his supporters.
Tiberius's final chapter is, well, it's bizarre and violent. Retreating entirely to the island of Capri for a life of cruelty and debauchery, he just leaves Rome to its own devices. And how does Rome's second emperor finally meet his end at age 78? It's reported that the Praetorian prefect, Naevius Sertorius Macro, literally smothered Tiberius with a pillow. The motivation was terrifyingly simple. He just wanted to hasten the accession of the next heir in line.
That takes us to Section 4, Caligula, Claudius, and Chaos.
Caligula's incredibly short, brutal reign kicks off with him immediately executing his designated co-heir, his cousin Tiberius Gemellus. He goes on this wild rampage, executing relatives and seizing inheritances across the board. But his end is really what defines his rule. The Praetorian Guard had simply had enough. In AD 41, a Praetorian tribune named Cassius Chaerea literally corners Caligula in an underground theater passage and stabs him to death. The emperor's own bodyguards had just assassinated the man they were sworn to protect.
Following Caligula's murder, the guards literally just find his uncle Claudius and make him emperor. And Claudius is this incredible paradox. On one hand, massive public achievements. Despite having absolutely no political experience, he successfully invades Britain in AD 43, expands the empire, presides over public trials, and issues up to 20 edicts a day. He was a great builder. But on the other hand, he had fatal private vulnerabilities. He was seen as highly vulnerable by the nobility, so he was constantly executing senators to shore up his position. Even worse, he was heavily manipulated by his wives, first Messalina, and later his own niece, Agrippina the Younger. It is widely documented by ancient historians that Agrippina eventually had Claudius poisoned just to put her own son on the throne.
And that brings us to the climax. Section 5, Nero, the dynasty implodes.
Thanks to his mother's ruthless maneuvering, Nero ascends to the absolute peak of global power at just 16 years old. A teenager, was handed the keys to the empire. In his first year, the entire day-to-day running of the Roman state was managed by his mother, Agrippina. She had even arranged the death of Claudius's biological son, Britannicus, just to secure Nero's claim. But here is the ultimate, tragic twist of the Julio-Claudians. To consolidate his own power, Nero eventually turns on his mother, arranging her murder along with the execution of his own wife.
The actual crash of the dynasty is a massive cascade of disasters. It starts with the Great Fire of Rome devastating the city in AD 64. To pay for these massive reconstruction projects, Nero heavily taxes the empire's provinces. Then, the Roman Senate, realizing they have been totally stripped of power, organizes the Pisonian conspiracy in AD 65 to assassinate him. The plot fails, but it completely exposes the deep, irreconcilable fractures in his rule. By late AD 67, the heavy taxation causes provincial governors like Vindex in Gaul and Galba in Spain to launch open military rebellions. Nero's grip completely slips.
Everything finally culminates in the bitter end of AD 68. With armies marching on Rome, the Praetorian Guard is bribed by rivals to abandon Nero. The Senate declares him a public enemy. Cornered and entirely out of options, Nero commits suicide with the help of his scribe, Epaphroditus. With his death, the 95-year reign of the Julio-Claudians comes to a sudden, violent end, plunging the Roman Empire into a massive civil war known as the Year of the Four Emperors.
So, what does this all mean? I want to leave you with a provocative thought here. How did a dynasty this chaotic manage to build a Roman Empire that lasted for centuries? I mean, despite the endless poisonings, the deep paranoia, the total lack of natural heirs, and the Praetorian purges, they somehow built an administrative, legal, and military machine that outlasted their own self-destruction. It really shows the incredible cost of absolute power and the enduring legacy of the institutions they accidentally forged right in the fires of their own family drama. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the history in front of you.